we're talking intensity of contractions. You want to know why a lot of people are saying that labor is so painful, right? Because other people will say, oh, it wasn't that bad. And it depends on your environment. As I said before, there's the 5 pillars of empowerment. So the question is, how intense does labor have to be for it to be active? And the answer is going to surprise you. So oftentimes, if you go into the medical system and you say, you know, like labor is really progressing, I feel like I'm making some progress, and they'll say to you, no, you're not in enough pain, so we're going to have to boost the intensity of your contractions because you're not progressing as far as what they're concerned with. This is a labor trap, because the truth is, you could have the most mild labor, and then all of a sudden at the end of it, just like ramp up and baby's born in 10 minutes. Or you could have the most intense labor and nothing happens. And it's not that your body's not working, it's that sometimes the intensity of labor, and this is why I hate Pitocin, does not actually mean that things are going to progress. Now, there is a difference between the intensity of labor when it comes to physiological birth and your body's biological process and how it would do it if there's no interventions. So physiological birth basically means no interventions, no interference. Nobody is trying to get things going. Nobody is trying to make you follow some sort of timeline. You're just following the process and riding the wave. This is my most favorite way to give birth because you're just following your own process and you don't have any of those interventions that can then lead to more interventions and then more birth trauma on top of that and more pain. So I have had 2 technically physiological births, one at home and one in the hospital. And even though I had a physiological birth in theory in the hospital, it's probably there was a lot of interference. So I had to go and get the gas, not because it was too painful, but because I needed to escape and go back into my physiological process. Because interruptions during the physiological process takes you out of your labor trance. So then things hurt more. It takes you out of your ability to work with your body because you're no longer tuned into your body. You're tuned into what other people are telling you to do. So physiological birth is really about following your own instincts, your own intuition, and just going with it. And this is why when people say, oh, well, your labor is not intense enough, so therefore you can't be far enough along, it doesn't always work. If you've been induced before and you're really used to that intense level of pain, and then you go and have a physiological birth at home, what often happens, and I've seen this with my clients and with my friends who've done this after having been induced before, is that they aren't even aware that they have hit transition or that their baby is almost out. They're just like, okay, things are finally at the level that it's really intense and I need to go in and I probably got 8 more hours of this. And what happens is they end up going in and then they give birth to their baby within an hour. Because when you have the Pitocin induced contractions, whether you've been actually induced, which means your labor started by them doing things to you, breaking your water, ripening your cervix, starting the oxytocin drip, they basically did that to start your labor. The other one is augmentation. And that's when they do the same things that they would do with an induction, but it's to speed up your labor. So with the intensity of contractions, with a Pitocin induced thing, it's basically like smacking a ketchup bottle over and over and over and over and over again and trying to get that ketchup out of it. That's basically what they're doing. They're just trying to crank up as much of the intensity as they possibly can until something happens. So you could end up having like a level 9 to 10 intensity and pain, but that's not going to open your cervix because it's not about smacking a ketchup bottle over and over to try to get a baby out. That's not what your uterus actually needs to do. But the medical system has been built on the idea that our bodies are defective machines. And they just think if we continue to ramp up the speed and we continue to ramp up the pressure, then eventually something will happen. It doesn't work that way. That is why a lot of labors that are induced or augmented often lead to cesareans, They lead to assisted vaginal deliveries with forceps and vacuum and episiotomy. They lead to more pain. They lead to you saying, I can't do this anymore. I need to get the epidural. It's all a labor trap. So what have I talked about with labor traps is that a labor trap is basically this. The medical system and our cultural ideas of birth have somehow convinced you that your body doesn't work. So then you do an intervention to make your body work the way that you're thinking that it's supposed to. And then you end up with the exact opposite of the kind of birth that you actually wanted. And one of these big labor traps is when they say you need to go into the hospital when your contractions are so strong that you can't stand it anymore. Or you go in and they say, well, you need to have them longer, stronger, closer together. And then you're thinking, as you're going in at the point thinking, I can't stand this anymore, you then have this idea that things are just going to keep getting worse. When really what happens is this often happens, especially with moms who've been induced before, is they hit transition and they remember what it was like when they had that intensity of contractions on Pitocin, and they think, I've got another 8 hours of this. So then they're like, I can't do this again. I don't want this again. I'm giving in, I'm getting the epidural. And then the epidural either doesn't work on time because it takes time for the freezing to actually kick in, and they suddenly have a baby. So they had the epidural, but they didn't need it. So a lot of the time this happens, you think, I need to have these pain medication. And then an hour later, your baby's born. Or 15 minutes later, your baby is born. Well, now you've introduced the drugs into your system that you didn't need. And that could have also caused some other problems that you have in postpartum, such as back pain. Maybe your baby's a little bit more sluggish to breastfeed. Or maybe it's just like, what was the point? Why did I have to sit through that awful contraction waiting for the epidural to get in? And then it was only going to work for 5 minutes and my baby was out. Like, I could have just sat through without having to do that, moved my body, not had to sit still, because you actually have to sit still for the epidural. And you just don't have to do that. So how does labor actually work? Well, the way labor actually works, I've talked about this last week as well, is that your uterus is toning up, because your uterus is the muscle that's going to expel your baby out. It has absolutely nothing to do with you pushing. It has absolutely nothing to do with your baby pushing their head down on the cervix to open the hole. When we're talking about dilation, everybody focuses on dilation, but they're not focusing on what actually needs to happen. So your uterus is also very smart as a muscle. So it knows how much it needs to tone up ahead of time. And if you're having a labor where your uterus is basically like, hey, we're going to need to push this baby out in one big push. So we're going to need to build up that fundal muscle, which is the muscle up at the top of the uterus. You're going to have more contractions that are doing this. So they're going to be squeezing on this side. So your uterus is basically has two different ways of contracting. One is when it's squeezing like this. And what it's doing is it's actually pulling those muscles up to the top. I wish I had a sock to show you, but I don't right now. And it's pulling them all up to the top to build a really, really strong fundus. And that intensity might not even be that much. People can have those false Braxton Hicks, as they call them, but I call them the false contractions or the practice contractions. And you have lots and lots of practice contractions before you actually go into labor. You're going to have a much stronger uterine muscle. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong about red raspberry leaf tea as well, is that you keep thinking, oh, that's going to induce labor. No, that's not what it does. What red raspberry leaf tea actually does is it tones your uterus. It tones your muscles. So the more you have that uterine tone, the more efficient the contractions are going to be. It may not actually make your labor faster. You may still end up having a baby that comes at 41 weeks. You may still have a baby that comes at 42 weeks. But what it will do is it will make those contractions more efficient. because your uterus is now toned up. It's muscular. It's got more strength to it. So then what happens is you go from having those contractions that first squeeze things and start pulling those muscles up. And as it does that, then the cervix basically thins out, so effaces. And then because there is an opening within the cervix, it's also technically dilating. And then the baby is also helping with that too, because at some point, your contractions are going to go from being just squeezing and bringing up those muscles to pushing down. And those ones are going to push your baby the last few centimeters down out through the cervix. And those ones are more intense because you're now going from nice buildup of muscle to let's get this kid out. You're going to feel more pressure because baby is now moving down. Again, it doesn't have to be super intense though. You could get to the point where you're like, you know what? I'm kind of tired and I'm going to go to bed because it doesn't feel like anything's happening. And then all of a sudden, those contractions kick in. And you're like, holy crap, what the hell is this? I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I think I've just like, what the hell was I thinking staying home? Or what the hell was I thinking doing this without drugs? But what's happening is your baby is actually coming down. So that intensity at that point, that's the most intense it's going to be. Your baby's almost on the way out. But when you're saying that, as you've already been induced before, you get that level of intensity with the squishing and there's no break. And then it's also trying to do this before your baby's ready. So the oxytocin contractions are not pulling up gently. Instead, they're doing this. And they're thinking that let's just smack that baby down as much as we can. And the head is just going to get on the cervix, and then that will push the baby down. It's also why they try to break your waters. I'll talk about that in another class, but that is basically what it is. And a friend of mine who's a nurse clinician also said, it's like putting a brick on a gas pedal of a car without a steering wheel, and then expecting that car to drive to its destination. More likely, it's going to smack right into a tree. If you do get there, you may not get there all in one piece. Because if you're doing that and you actually do manage to get from the space where you're at to your destination with that brick on the gas pedal, you're still crashing into the wall. You may still make it to your destination, but maybe you don't make it to the nice driveway that you were planning to. You've just driven right into the front door of the person's house. So that's the analogy, basically. It's like, oh yeah, you're there, but look at the damage that's happened. Pitocin is no joke. Induction is no joke. And when you interfere with the physiological birth process and you're just trying to augment labor or try to induce it, what's happening is that they think intensity is a good thing. Now, I'm just going to say it. Most of our birth culture in our society and our medical system is very much used to the idea, this is another labor trap and a natural birth trap, that your labor must progress by a certain point, that you need to dilate a certain amount of centimeters per hour, that if you're a second-time mom, that you should go faster. We'll talk about that in another class as well. And basically, you need to follow this timeline, this arbitrary timeline. You need to fit in this box. And if you don't fit in this box, this textbook of what we say labor is supposed to be, then obviously we need to do something. Either we need to speed it up with the drugs, or we need to get your labor started because you're, again, not following into that model of what they've basically decided is appropriate for labor. Some hospitals will say, you've been in labor for 8 hours and nothing seems to be happening, so we're going to do Pitocin. Some of them it's 12. Some people will even say, you know, you've been in labor for 4 hours and you're still only at 1 centimeter. So you know what? Like, we're going to start running something to get you going. Or you aren't even in labor yet, but you're 39 weeks, your cervix isn't doing anything, And they're saying, you know, you don't have any signs of labor starting anytime soon. So obviously your body doesn't work. That's the whole message. It's obviously your body's not going to do what we think it's supposed to do. So we need to put the brick on the gas pedal to get you to your destination. And the truth is, you could have the most mild labor, and then all of a sudden things ramp up and it's like, whoa, there's a baby. You could have this going on for 3 days where you have the nice, gentle contractions. Maybe they're like 12 minutes apart. Maybe they're even a couple hours apart. Maybe it's like, oh, I had a few that were really intense, and then things stopped. And then things got ramped up again, and then they stopped. And then I slept for 16 hours. And then after that, things got pretty intense at some point. Like there were some contractions that were like, whoa, I have to like basically vocalize through. And then others were nothing. And then they kept spacing out, and then they'd get close together, and then they'd space out again. One of my clients, with her labor, she had had 2 previous cesareans. So her uterus knew that it couldn't really do the whole pushing and ramping up and push the baby out in 2 contractions. So instead, what happened to bring the baby down is her uterus actually started to gently start to have her push on a few of the contractions that she was having in transition. And I could always tell which ones were opening the cervix and pulling up and which ones were then pushing down. So she had a mix of the 2. And then she would have a couple of minutes or more where she'd just be sleeping. She'd be resting inside of the pool. And then all of a sudden she'd shift her body. She'd get back up. She'd lean forward. She'd have the contraction, bringing the baby down, until at one point it was all just pushing contractions. And she just was feeling that on each one, when the peak happened, it's like, just help ease the baby down, just bear down. And that baby was born within an hour or so. I don't have the exact timeline, but that's for another video when we talk about pushing and how that's also a labor trap. So there are so many labor traps within the system. It's when you look at it, a lot of what's being done in maternity care and a lot of what's being taught in mainstream childbirth education and a lot of what is in our media and what our friends and our family have brought in their misconceptions of birth, it's very much that you need to fit into a box. And if you don't fit in that box, there's something wrong with you. And the truth is that there's nothing wrong with you. You're following your own physiological process. So what's a great book to read about the physiological process? Well, if you've been following me for a while, then you know that it's this one. This is my favorite. Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage is one of my absolute favorite books to go through when it comes to the physiological process of birth. And when you understand how your body actually works and what the hormones actually do and why things are a certain way, you start to see, oh, that's why that medical intervention can be such a problem. That's why that can lead to a cesarean. That's why that leads to an induction. That's why that then leads to another cascade of interventions. I get it now. Now, I'm not going to say you're going to figure it out overnight, because I've been doing this for the last 10 years and I've had 2 physiological births. I've supported moms with physiological birth. I've listened to stories from midwives and doulas. And I mean, basically birth is my life. I just consume it. That's 24/7. I consume something on birth. So I also have that insight as well. But what you can do is, if you have already had a birth, maybe it didn't go to plan the way you wanted, what you can do is you can go through this book and you might be able to see some insights of maybe something that you did, or maybe something that you didn't understand, that is going to help you to be like, oh, I get it now. Now, I'm also going to say this, though. This is a book written by a midwife, and it's very targeted towards birth workers in the sense that it's got a lot of language that might be really confusing. It's also a really long book. And I'd summarize a lot of what's in Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. And Rachel Reed does have an Instagram as well. You can go on to Midwife Thinking. And she's got a lot of good things that she puts in her podcasts, which is the Midwife's Cauldron, and you can watch that, or you can listen to that as well. But one thing that I've done is I've taken all of this knowledge that I have behind me, all of these books, and I've put them inside of a system, because basically you need to have the right support. You need to have the right mindset. You need to have those two things are like the bookends. So once you have the right mindset and you're getting past your fear and you're starting to see how you can create your birth the way that you want, and you know what you want, that last pillar, the right support, is how you get people to help you move forward. And so the Your Empowered Birth book that I have right now on my website, you can get it at www.empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. It teaches you 5 key elements, 5 key pillars that you need. You need to have the right mindset. You need to have the right education. You need to have the right environment. You need to have the right facilitators, and you need to have the right support. One of the things that this book does specifically is it helps you figure out what you want in your birth. How to get the birth you want without having to fight, beg, or compromise is a big part of it. It's about understanding how your body works and your own unique process. Because I can't actually tell you what your process is. Nobody can. The only one who can tell you what your own unique process is you. And if you've already had 1 or more disappointing births, then you can actually go back by asking some of the questions that are inside the book in the chapter, How to Get the Birth You Want the Second Time. And when you go through the chapter before that, How to Get the Birth You Want the First Time, you'll start to see where you might have made a mistake or where you might have not realized that you were falling into a trap, so that you can get out of it. The other bonus to having this book is that it comes with extra tips. So there is an actual section where you can go and get bonus material that will help you learn more about physiological birth. It also comes with a copy of the 20 natural birth traps that you want to avoid. And in addition to that, I send you additional tips and things that you would probably not be able to find. I mean, I can't teach a whole thing on this book. However, I do draw from the other books that are behind me to give you that information in a way that you can understand it, so that you're not having to work through and be like, what the heck are they talking about? You don't have to pull from a dictionary to try to understand the birth lingo, because a lot of doulas, we do have doula speak, and a lot of midwives have midwife speak. And it can be really frustrating, especially when you're just starting out, to try to figure that out. I myself am the kind of person that I will go and read medical journals, but you probably don't want to have to try to figure out a medical journal and what it says. So I can find additional resources, and I sometimes send these through the list. I send these through my content. These videos will help you as well, because I pull everything. And so I'm just going to let you know, you can go get this book right now. You can go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/book, and it will come with the book itself. You will also get a copy of the Natural Birth Traps Guide. And if you are already within the Facebook community, then you know that we have some of the best resources here just for you to get the right education. But having that right mindset ahead of time, and having the right support and someone who can say, you know what, I've been there, I believe in you, that's the real key. So Your Empowered Birth helps you get all 5 of those pillars, the 5 pillars of empowered birth, so that you can optimize them and figure them all out for yourself. Because as I said, nobody can tell you how your birth is going to go. Not your doctor, not your doula, not your midwife, not your partner, not childbirth educator. Nobody can tell you how your birth is going to go. This is your physiological process. You have your own natural rhythms based on what happened before with your births. Maybe you had a few C-sections, so your uterus is going to work in a different way than somebody who's like not had any C-sections and has a really powerful uterine muscle already. It's just like, I'm going to push this baby out in like 2 minutes. So you really need to have something that's customized to you. You also need to know where to get the right information. And a lot of people, they just keep telling you the same stuff over and over. That's going to be a natural birth trap or a labor trap or something else. I mean, first of all, did you even know that your contractions don't have to be super intense for you to progress in your labor? That you could have the most mild labor and all of a sudden just at the end hit transition, be like, oh, I must be in active labor. And all of a sudden a baby's coming out and you're like, oh, actually that was the end. Like most people don't say that. They say, oh, labor is going to get super painful. Even the nurses, if they start to see that you're vocalizing, they might be like, it's just going to get worse. But it might not. It might not get worse. That might be the actual pace that your uterus needs. And you're just going to stay at that intensity. And you're just going to be like, oh, I can totally ride the wave on every single one of these. This isn't so bad after all. And then maybe like the last 5 minutes, you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. This sucks. And then all of a sudden you're done. Because that's what happened to me. The first labor, it was very much like I had contractions 2 minutes apart, but they were very easy. I was like, oh, I can do this. I can do this every 2 minutes. This is easy. And then they never really got intense until 2 minutes before my baby descended. And even then, if I had just done the rest and be thankful phase and not tried to push in the hospital, what would have happened is I probably would have had 3 hours of rest. And then my uterus would have kicked into high gear and pushed my baby out when I was ready. But I didn't know that. And that's the thing, is that you don't know what you don't know if you aren't aware that physiological birth does not fit into a box or a textbook. All right, so that's all I have for you today on labor intensity. And again, if you want that book, go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/book and get it. Or if you would prefer, you can even just send me an email or hit me up in Messenger and say, hey, I'd like my copy because I'm in the Facebook group and I just like my copy of the book. And hey, I'll reach out to you. And if you have any other questions, in addition to that, like, hey, do you have a resource on this, like on non-stress tests, or do you know anything about induction? Do you know what book I could get for that? Not only will you get your Empowered Mom birth gift pack from me, but I'll also send you that too, because you may not be aware of this, but I have over 900 resources in an Empowered Birth secret library with like multiple links to everything that I have pulled from my knowledge and education for the last 10 years. And Jenny can attest to herself as someone who has worked through and tried to copy this over onto the website. And it is a massive database. So chances are, if you have a question on anything related to birth or pregnancy, postpartum, I've got it. It's inside my archives. I may not have taught it yet in this group, but I guarantee you I've got something. And if I don't have it, somebody in my network has it. So absolutely send me a message anytime, because this group is basically for you to get that right education, to get the right environment for learning, to start choosing the right environment for birth for yourself, to understand where you feel safe, to understand who to hire as your care provider, your doula, your midwife, your childbirth educators, if you've got a chiropractor, if you need help with gestational diabetes or any chronic problem that you have, a chronic illness or a chronic condition. Jenny herself had gestational diabetes and chronic high blood pressure. So part of her learning wasn't just through birth, but also to find those resources when it comes to how to avoid any complications, because she had chronic high blood pressure and she wanted to monitor that. And in the end, she got a vaginal birth after cesarean unassisted in the hospital. So you can actually have your birth any way you want it, even when you're high risk. Even when other people say that you can't, you can. It all comes down again to what is inside your empowered birth, the book that I'm talking about, empoweringmomsbirth.com/book, where you can get the right mindset, get past your fears, know what you want in your birth. You get the right education. You know where to find those additional resources. You know what you're actually looking for. You're not just trying to download everything all at once, because you only have so much time in a day. And then you get the right environment for learning. Being in this Facebook community is a good way to get in that environment for learning, because, hey, if you ask a question in this group, I guarantee somebody has had that experience or knows somebody who does, or is able to be like, hey, I just read this resource not too long ago, this article, and here you go, and drop it into the comments. So when I say comment in the group, I mean it. Like, actually ask some questions, because you're going to get more help. It's not just about coming in for a live class every week. If you want to get extra help, just put a message into the group or put a message into the chat. Send me a message, send Jenny a message. Jenny is really good at gestational diabetes and chronic high blood pressure, because that was her thing. And she's got a whole bunch of resources, and we're just here to help you, because we know what happens if you go into the other mom groups and you're not going to get the right answers. You might get a few if there's a few doulas in there, but we can't get into every single thread in a different group. We can in the Empowered Birth community. And then from there, like the right facilitators, I help moms find the right care providers. There's a lot of resources as well in our guide section when it comes to how to hire your care provider. Or, hey, I've got a book. It's called How to Hire Your Care Provider. Literally walks you through those steps. And you'll get a little bit of that inside your Empowered Birth as well. So again, I just want to let you know about that. Go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. Thank you so much. I love you. I appreciate you. And I will talk to you next week.